Speaking of OfferingTree, I have some big news to share. Many of you already know that OfferingTree is the software that I use to register students for my classes, trainings, and workshops. Well, I'm not sure if you knew this, but they also offer a website platform, a place where you can have a very simple and easy to use website. And this month, so it might be this week when the podcast comes out or next week, it's somewhere very soon if it hasn't happened already when this podcast goes out, they are releasing an update to the website side of things. And I cannot wait for you to see this. It's going to mean that you can customize things even more. So to check it out, visit OfferingTree.com. And if you decide to sign up, make sure to use our special listener discount. That's over at OfferingTree.com/Shannon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals. This is an online membership for yoga teachers, PTs, movement educators, healthcare professionals, and anyone who wants to learn more about pelvic health. Every month, we hire guest experts to teach us the most up-to-date information, and you get to attend calls and get your questions answered in real live time. It's really cool in there. Our December guest is actually today's podcast guest. Niamh Daly is going to be there, so you can have a listen today to the episode and then join the call to ask more questions. Visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com to sign up. Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, and this podcast is being recorded on Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga land, also called the Bruce Peninsula in Ontario, Canada, if you want to look up this place where I live and podcast from. And I want to tell you that it is getting cold around here. Snow is in the forecast for this week. Also, if you're new here, you might not know that I'm a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, and founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. If you are a returning listener, thank you so much for being here. And you know how it goes here. This podcast was created for all yoga teachers so that each and every week you can feel supported and connected to information and inspiration. Because I get it. Being an entrepreneur, being a yoga teacher, it's a lot. Not only do you have the business side of things, that entrepreneur, what email should I send out? How do I plan this class? What about my continuing education credits and keeping that up, along with your own yoga practice so that you can share yoga, learning about the philosophy of yoga and the new information that's coming out about science and all the things. And that is why we put this podcast together, so that while you're maybe doing the most mundane, boring things, driving around, cleaning, walking outside, all the things that you're doing and you're busy doing, you can take this information on the go with you. Like today's podcast episode, because we have a very special guest. Niamh Daly is here to talk to us about menopause and all of the things that we need to know as yoga teachers who are working with people who are in this perimenopausal, menopause, postmenopausal phase. And we know that this is something that half the world's population is going to go through at some point in their lives. Yet it's still not as understood as I think it could be. And I don't know that people in this stage of life are getting the support they need. We've talked about menopause on the podcast in a few episodes, and I'll link to those in our show notes. All of the show notes are over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/299, or you could go to our website and type in menopause, and these will pop up. So Shirley Weir talked to us in episode 212, Menopause Myths and Facts. Leslie Kazadi talked to us back in episode 56, Yoga and Menopause. And Barb Elias talked to us in episode 271, Yoga and Bone Health. These all are connected, and there's more that we can be learning. So today, Niamh Daly joins me to fill in some of the gaps we may have in our understanding and knowledge around menopause, specifically around yoga and menopause. We talk about the fluctuating nature of perimenopause, why learning about this phase is so necessary, and actually what comes before this phase as well, and the nutrition and exercise requirements that we might not be considering for people at this stage. And Niamh asks a really great question. She is asking, why is prenatal yoga teacher training so popular, but there's not that much in terms of yoga teacher training for peri and postmenopause phases? And if we look at our student population is generally in this perimenopause, postmenopausal phase of life way longer than they are in a prenatal phase of life. So I'm really glad you're here today to learn more about this, because it's not in every yoga teacher training, and it definitely needs to be part of the conversation that we're having. Niamh teaches and supports people who are navigating life changes, especially menopause, whether medically, surgically, prematurely, or naturally induced, through adapted yoga and also nutrition. She also trains yoga teachers worldwide to understand menopause and the stages immediately before and after, and she covers how yoga teachers can support their students. One little note as we're talking connected yoga teachers, you are going to hear us talk a lot in today's episode about women, and I want to acknowledge that both Niamh and I get into the habit sometimes of talking about women and menopause, but this episode is for anyone dealing with that perimenopause, postmenopausal, that phase of life. So I learned a lot in this interview with Niamh, and then I asked her if she could come and expand even more inside of pelvic health professionals. And I'm excited that you get to listen here today. And then if you have questions and if you would like to learn more, you can sign up for our membership. That's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com, and join live in December when Niamh comes in and talks to us even more on this topic around menopause and yoga. Niamh also offers a certificate in training yoga for the stages of menopause, so I'll make sure to include a link to that in our show notes as well. I'm excited that we get to learn about menopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, and way beyond this, so let's dive in and hear from Niamh. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Niamh. It's so great to have you here.
A pleasure to be here. I'm delighted.
I'm excited that we get to talk about menopause, perimenopause, and how this impacts us as yoga teachers and how it's impacting our yoga students. But before we dive into that, tell us, what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
Yeah, so I am primarily a yoga teacher since 2004. And I also am a nutrition coach, and I have done a training in Pilates because I wanted to be able to offer all the variety of supports that are needed to navigate us through life, really, the 4 pillars of health, which are nutrition, exercise, sleep, and stress management. But yoga was sort of my first movement love, along with 5 rhythms dancing. And I teach yoga generally to the general population, but it has really honed in for me into the midlife woman and the woman in later life that I'm interested in supporting, because it's an area that's been missing attention for many, many years. And when I started to reach into researching how good yoga could be for the stages of menopause, I felt like I was arriving in this huge, big, open territory where no one had ever been. And I put down a pin in the middle of it, and I called that yoga for menopause. And that's kind of growing, just like the yoga for pregnancy pin or landscape is growing. I feel that I'm kind of central to opening that conversation and making menopause part of the expectation that yoga teachers should have in terms of their knowledge, that we should expect that of them, because of the huge variety of ways in which women are affected by the stages of menopause. So I think it's really about trying to reach women with the awareness that there are things that they can do to support their journey through perimenopause. And yoga teachers have so much of that at their disposal if only they understand what's going on biochemically, physically, mentally, and emotionally. They would understand how much they can do to help someone navigate this stage much more smoothly, I suppose. So yeah, those are my people. My people are midlife women, and also, of course, the women who reach menopause for other reasons, like surgical intervention or because of medicinal intervention after cancer, because of premature ovarian insufficiency, and also maybe I don't actually have any clients currently who've chosen to transgender, but certainly they would also be losing, if you're transitioning from female to male, you'd be losing those female sex hormones as well, which have a huge impact on our whole body, which I hope we'll talk about.
So when that transition is happening, and we have a couple of podcasts on menopause, and I'll link to those in our show notes, we learned in those ones, in those podcasts, it's not just menopause. There's also this whole time leading up to, which you've already referred to as perimenopause.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know when we ourselves have hit that perimenopause phase, or what are our yoga students experiencing at that phase?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, it's an enormous question, and I could go into a 40-hour teacher training right now to give you that information. So there is a stage even before perimenopause, which I love to try and help women understand, which is the late reproductive stage. So in the late reproductive stage, our hypothalamus, pituitary, ovarian axis, so the signals from our hypothalamus to our ovaries start to upregulate when they notice that there is a decline in the number of follicles in the ovaries. And it can be a time where we have a sense of sort of increased libido, increased energy. We look kind of radiant, and we might be shooting out eggs at a rate of knots, time when we can have a higher incidence of fraternal twins, for instance, when the ovaries are kind of getting a bit over enthusiastic and ripening many follicles. And that can be accompanied by this beginning of a reduction in the sex hormone progesterone. And progesterone is a hormone that helps us to stay asleep. It's a very gentle, kind of calming neurotransmitter, and it helps us to offset the rather jiggy and enthusiastic energy of estrogen, which is more like, I don't know, that girl from Sex and the City, Carrie, was that her name? The one who's really sociable, really capable, and just looks fab all the time. So that's the kind of picture of estrogen. And when you get this imbalance where estrogen is a little more enthusiastic and progesterone is a little less enthusiastic, we may still be having regular menstruation, or menstruation that seems maybe slightly different, but you'd have to be really in tune with your menses to notice the maybe little heavier, or maybe a day or a half a day further apart or closer together. And this is a phase, though, that is also accompanied by things like anxiety and hot flashes and maybe brain fog. And it's very confusing for the woman who's experiencing this to see that she has regular menstruation, but she's having some of what she might, if she had the knowledge, associate with perimenopause, but it just doesn't seem right for her because she may only be in her mid to late 30s. And so that's a time of a lot of fear for women. And that's one of the reasons I do the work I do, is to try and help women to, or help our yoga teachers to help their students, and for me to help my own students and clients to recognize what's coming, so that they don't go into that downward spiral of fear that, I'm dying, I'm developing early onset Alzheimer's, I'm really ill, I'm, developing all sorts of, the way one's imagination can take root. So that is a phase where if you can tune into it and recognize what's probably happening in your body, and that you wake up to that sense of, okay, I'm not superhuman, I'm not immortal, I will, like other people, end up going through perimenopause, then it's a really helpful time to start to put things in place that could be the difference between you having a really rough ride and a much gentler ride through the ups and downs of perimenopause. The actual symptoms or traits of perimenopause that a primary health provider would notice would acknowledge would be changes in the duration of your menstrual cycle, changes in the volume of your menstrual cycle. They would also connect that to some symptoms and to your age. So if you're 45 or older and you've got irregular menstrual periods and you're getting things like hot flushes, brain fog, that kind of thing, then your healthcare provider will likely just on that alone, on symptoms and age alone, will say you're in perimenopause. If you're having that kind of sense, those kinds of symptoms and discomforts and changes under the age of 45, you will unfortunately get a lot of primary healthcare providers saying, oh, don't be ridiculous. You're too young. It can't be that. You don't need any help. You don't need any extra care. Just off you go and get on with life. And this can be women who are undergoing things like incredible aches and pains in their joints, incredible fatigue, a real loss of joy in life, huge things that can be really impactful on their comfort and strength. So there are symptoms there, and I would say that usually a woman knows way beyond or way before her primary healthcare practitioner will really acknowledge. She knows that stuff is changing. But you can ask me other questions, if there's something going on for you or people you've worked with that are not, who are not sure, that you're not sure about what's going on in that circumstance. Because of course there are things that can be like perimenopause, like thyroid dysfunction, hyper and hypothyroid dysfunction can be very similar to perimenopause. And that's something that usually appears between the age of 30 and 50 in women and is very common in women. And of course, periods can also become irregular for people who are over-exercising, who are going through cancer treatments, who are under-eating, and who have a lot of stress. So it's not as simple as it might seem.
Thank you for this. I really appreciate that you said, it can be really bring on a lot of fear when you go to your healthcare provider and you feel like, I know what's going on, but then they say, no, you're too young. That can't be what it is. And it can be, and we need to trust that, or it could be other things. We need to keep looking into it. Mm-hmm. Once we figure out, okay, well, how do we then? Like, do you get your hormones tested? Is it by your symptoms? Like, what is going to be the definitive answer? Or maybe is there one?
Yeah, it's a great question. So blood tests are dodgy, to say the least. What a doctor will likely test you for, a kind of a general practitioner, as we call them in Ireland, will test you mostly for follicle stimulating hormone if they're trying to figure out whether you're in perimenopause or not. Follicle stimulating hormone, as you can imagine by the name, will go up in our bodies when we're trying to ripen the last follicles in the ovaries. So our brain notices all this dwindling supply, and the ovaries are going, I've had enough. I don't want to do this anymore. And they're kind of winding down. They're saying, oh, shut up, brain. Stop telling me to do stuff. And the brain goes, I'm going to make you. So it sends out a load of follicle stimulating hormone. And the ovaries are like, oh, okay, I'll do it. And they get to work again, which is why we have this fluctuating picture of perimenopause, where you get these transformative spikes of estrogen for a while, and then these devastating drops of estrogen for a while, and it comes and it goes in fits and starts. So likewise, follicle stimulating hormone, if somebody tests you for that and it is not elevated, they can't say that you're not in perimenopause, because it shifts and changes day to day, even week to week, month to month. So you would have to really be testing a number of times to get that as a definitive indicator. You can test the levels of estrogen and progesterone in the bloodstream, but it's really usually tested postmenopausally to see whether you're finished your perimenopause and are now officially given the badge of being fully menopausal. So there isn't a definitive test. There are some companies who will do, like, they'll test your absolutely everything. They'll test your testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, or estrogen, as you would call it in Canada. We have an O at the beginning and we call it estrogen. I don't know why. We like to confuse things over here in Ireland and in the UK indeed. And it's a really good time to get a number of blood tests done. It's a really good time to get your thyroid checked, a really good time to get your vitamin D checked, your magnesium, lots of other, a full blood count is a really advisable thing at this time. But there isn't a definitive blood test. And you can make a good guess, and an educated, a well-educated healthcare provider can make a good guess, I would say, is probably the most definitive we can get.
Connected yoga teachers, I wanted to pop in here for a moment to share part of a conversation that Ashley Hagen and I had about OfferingTree. We both use this software. We both recommend it a lot to yoga teachers, and here is why we do. I want to ask you, because you and I both use OfferingTree and we both talk about OfferingTree a lot. So once yoga teachers are like, okay, I'm going to teach online classes, then what do you tell them about OfferingTree?
I tell them first to check out OfferingTree. Well, OfferingTree is something that I have been using, I think only since September. So actually a year, so about a year. And I absolutely love it. And before I was a mind-body user with my studio, super complicated, way expensive. I've also used other softwares as well. But OfferingTree has made it so simple because it puts everything all in one. When I got started in 2015-16, I had to purchase multiple subscriptions to an online course platform, for my membership, for my schedule. Everything was separate. And then I had to also build a website to put everything inside of it, and hopefully everything pieced together okay, because it was all just different and it was expensive. I think I did the math and it was like $150 a month, and I wasn't making money. So with OfferingTree, it puts everything all in one, where you can sell courses, you can put your schedule up, make appointments, even build your website in that one place, email management, all of it. So I always recommend it as a starting point. And if you need something above and beyond for some technical reason, or you're doing fancy things long down the road, then you can move on. But this is such a great starting point and really makes it so easy to build a website in less than a day and then put everything up there, and things you could start making sales tomorrow.
Yeah. What I am loving about it is that the Zoom links are there. The time zones show up for my students. Like I have my own website that I built, but I still use OfferingTree and I embed it on there so that when people go to that page, they can see the time of my classes in their time zone. I don't have to mess around and put times on there and go check, like, do I have those time zones right? And then answer 50 emails about what time is this in this place? And now I've just added also text reminders, which I love. And I asked students, like, is this too much? I'm sending you out an email reminder and then a text reminder. And they said no, because of the time zone. And, some of them are Pacific time, and I'm teaching at 9:30 in the morning at 6:30 for them in Pacific. So they're really appreciating it. And I feel like it just makes sense. It just saves so much time.
The primary reason I switched actually initially was because of the option to allow for donation-based classes. So you could have a free class, but also people could pay you without having to go through Venmo or PayPal or a separate step. So you can make it so that it's optional to pay, or you can put tiered pricing. So my class is free, or pay what you want, type in whatever. Or I have a little option to quote unquote, buy me a coffee for $5. Which is like half a coffee nowadays, but buy me a coffee. And I mean, I'm not trying to make a lot of money from it, but it's a couple $100s that I wasn't getting before each month prior to using OfferingTree.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. If you are wanting to check out OfferingTree, I have a special discount code for you. Go to offeringtree.com/Shannon to grab that. And now let's get back to our conversation with Niamh. So with all of the changes that are happening physically, which then also definitely impacts our emotions, how does yoga help in this perimenopause time?
Oh, how does it not? Well, of course, there are lots of ways that it cannot help. And you and I both know that the yoga world is responsible for a lot of stuff that we could do with unpicking. I think it's, like it or not, many yoga teachers are essentially in the diet industry and in the beauty industry, and it certainly has strayed a little away from its roots as something that is really about wellness and centering. And so within those, I'll just talk about those negatives first, which are, the body beautiful, the slim ideal part of the yoga world can be really damaging to the menopausal woman, and also the striving to perfect a pose, perfect obviously in air quotes, can be already damaging to any physical body, no matter what its age. But when it comes to the struggles of perimenopause and menopause, which might be fatigue or might be joint pain, and then the physiological issues, which are around a reduction of cartilage, a reduction of synovial fluid, a reduction of collagen, we're looking at people who are much more inclined to injury, and recovery is also slower. And one of the main reasons I suppose I started to work to educate yoga teachers in how to support women through menopause was because I was hearing of people who were leaving their beloved yoga classes because the yoga was feeling unachievable to them. They used to be up the front, putting their leg behind their head, and then it just started to feel inappropriate, to say the least. And they started kind of going down the back of the class, and the teacher wasn't necessarily noticing that they were struggling in new ways. And so eventually they just drifted out the back door and didn't come back. And I find that very sad. If you're to look into yoga for menopause and how it supports menopause, there's two ways to look at it. One is through the kind of medical lens. And if you look at medical websites, or websites that are more from the traditional medicinal approach, the Western medicinal approach, they will not necessarily directly recommend yoga for menopause because it hasn't had sufficient research specifically in yoga for menopause. There has been research in yoga for serotonin, yoga for oxytocin, yoga for bones, yoga for heart health, yoga for brain health, yoga for sleep, all of which coming together create a very convincing pool of evidence to support the use of yoga to help women through menopause. There are other alternative stuff that is happily recommended by the yoga community, like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and they've taken some pranayama and given it English names, or, there's breath work in lots of traditions. We can't say they've stolen it from yoga. And they've researched that in helping menopausal symptoms such as sleeplessness, anxiety, and hot flashes, or hot flushes as we call them over here. But there hasn't been sufficient research for the medical community to be allowed. They would expect a certain percentage of peer-reviewed research for them to be able to say this is actually a really valid tool for supporting women through perimenopause and into the later years. But given that, for instance, perimenopause and menopause do not just affect our reproductive hormones, they affect our cortisol, our adrenaline, our oxytocin, and our serotonin, and all of our happy neurotransmitters. They affect all of those negatively. And there is research that shows that a yoga practice can increase levels of oxytocin, levels of serotonin, decrease levels of cortisol. And those are really positive things from the yoga world, because I would say that they're more important than some of the other issues that yoga can support. But we also know that yoga supports cardiovascular health, the risks to which increase quite a lot postmenopausally. In fact, our risk of cardiovascular disease postmenopausally comes to equal that of men, whereas premenopausally we had a much lower risk of heart disease. And then also we know that yoga can help our emotional states. It helps our neurotransmitters. It helps us neurologically. Any physical movement, especially learning something new, is good for our brain. And we know that brain health is also adversely affected by perimenopause. And we also have research that shows that there is some benefit to bone health from yoga. But I would say, and in my teacher training, I ask that my yoga teachers learn much more robust ways of stimulating muscle and bone, because the need is greater than I think yoga can deliver. So yeah, to sum up, It's good for the feel-good hormones. It's good for reducing cortisol and stress in general. Oh, and of course, we all know it's a fantastic sleep support. Who doesn't sleep better after a lovely yoga class? It's good for bones. It's good for heart. It's good for brain. It's good for emotions. So it's the whole package. But I think it's important to understand that we as yoga teachers will need to do a lot more to, to get those medical health professionals truly recommending it. Even though I know I work with an endocrinologist called Dr. Anise Mukherjee here, but she's in the UK. She's an endocrinologist of 30 years standing, and she's very much into, I mean, obviously she's at the forefront medicinally in terms of Western medicine, because she is in the business of understanding female hormones and medicating, and male hormones, and medicating where medication is needed. But she herself had breast cancer, so she can't use HRT. So she dived into the benefits of lifestyle approaches to support perimenopause and menopause. And she's, everything she says speaks of yoga, and yet she's not in a position to officially recommend it.
This is so good to know. Thank you for sharing that, because I didn't know that. I mean, we did have an episode with Mary Flaherty, and she was talking about different research papers. So that's so good to understand the research isn't there yet, but there is this other research pointing to the benefits for different things, different issues that would come up in perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah, there are some papers that you can read which are yoga for menopause. And it's interesting that some of them, that if you read a paper that's been done in India, interestingly, it's much more likely to have positive outcomes in the paper than a paper that has been researched and gone through the mill in another country, which I find really interesting. And I don't know why that is. It could be that people are more connected to the work in India and really happy to do it and dive in. But one of the reasons that research into yoga is difficult is because it is so subjective in many ways. It's like to make sure that the study is clinically accurate, it really requires teachers who are teaching exactly the same thing. Like, let's say you've got 5 or 6 teachers in a study, the nuances of personal flavor that we bring to our teaching are so huge. And the canon of yoga is so vast. It's not like Pilates, which you could probably do a research paper standing on your head, as it were, but don't stand on your head.
So for our yoga or our yoga practitioners, what I'm hearing you say is, if you're moving into this time of perimenopause and menopause, don't give up on yoga. Just find the class where the teacher is teaching to you. And for our yoga teachers, it sounds like it's get more educated, which is really wild that more education isn't there, since it's half the human population.
I know, but not only that, about 80% of yoga practitioners in the West are women, and a huge percentage of those are over 40. That it's a vast array of or a vast percentage of our demographic coming through the doors of our yoga studios. And if it's the young women, they're going to get there. They're, if they're lucky enough to live long enough, they will get there. And it's bonkers. It's one of my favorite and most popular posts on my social media. Every time I say social media, I feel I squirm. I hate it all. But anyway, one of my most popular posts is that women spend more time in the perimenopausal transition and postmenopausal than they do pregnant. And yet there are no first-line yoga teacher trainings that really even mention menopause in the training. And then even further advanced teacher trainings don't go into menopause. There's very little education about it, and yet pretty much all of them will have at least a small module on pregnancy. It's bats.
It's so true. That is so true. So where do we go as yoga teachers then to learn more? Once we've had to listen to this podcast and we're like, okay, I need to really think about this large group of people who are coming to yoga. How do we learn more?
So obviously your lovely listeners can come to me. So I'm not the only person they can go to, but for me, I spent 5 years developing my work in yoga for perimenopause and menopause and beyond, and the late reproductive stage, which is one of my passions, to catch people before they go into that spiral of fear, and prepare them for the perimenopause and menopause. So I spent 5 years working with people and researching myself, and it was at a time when there really wasn't much that I could cling to. So it was a lot of work with a mentor of mine who's a nutritional therapist and a nutrition scientist, and she's obviously well educated about the human body in much more than any yogi would be, even if you've done a really fab anatomy course. So I worked with her, and I, as I told you, have connected with Dr. Mukherjee, who makes a contribution to my course as well. So that's from the medical perspective. And so I developed that course about 2 years ago, launched it just at the beginning of what was that thing? The pandemic? Is that the one? So I launched it then. And at that time, I thought I was the only teacher training in yoga for the stages of menopause. And then I discovered that there was another lady teaching something called menopause yoga, which is more like a franchise she had just launched, where she teaches a set number of, or set sequences to deal with particular issues. And she's more based around Ayurveda. So yeah, that was the beginning of a training that was particular about perimenopause. There were other trainings in women's hormones, yoga for women's hormones, about which menopause was a part. But now there are more CPD, continuous professional development courses, short courses available. And I think if you Google now training for yoga teachers in menopause, you might find something. I'm aligned to Yoga Alliance professionals in our UK body that's equivalent to Yoga Alliance in the US. I don't know if they have any courses similar, but people can come to me. It's a 40-hour training, and I do a 9-hour CPD as well, which is sort of wider for Pilates teachers and nutrition coaches and stuff, if you want to kind of a lighter dive into it, but it won't give you all the riches that yoga can offer.
That's amazing.
And the thing is, I'm a bit weird as well, because my yoga is not very traditional. I call it instinct yoga, not the yoga for menopause. That's more pragmatic, but my instinct yoga is very much around a kinder, more self-compassionate approach, where we're not aiming for an end position. We're not I don't mean that physically. I don't mean literally just an end position of an asana, but an end position in a yoga practice in general, where we're being less externally referenced. I'm very interested in helping women and teachers come in towards a trust in their own capability to know what their body needs. So it's more instinctual movement within the yoga canon, where we're seeking pleasure rather than achievement. So I'm a little left of field, a little exploratory, alongside putting resistance bands and dumbbells into the training, that kind of thing. So you might find that I don't suit everybody. I might be a little too outside the box. I'm very passionate about putting a halt to the injuries that we're hearing about in the yoga world, and changing the way it's advertised and all of those kinds of things as well. But anyway, I've kind of gone off topic there, probably.
No, I'm really excited. It's exciting to hear what your style of yoga is within this niche. I think that's really important. And I would encourage our listeners to go and check it out. We'll make sure to link to it in the show notes. And the other thing I want to highlight is that you're also really passionate about health at every size. Do you want to talk about that for a brief moment, and how that impacts perimenopause?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my God, the amount of times I hear women coming to me and saying they hate themselves on all sorts of levels. They hate the changing shape of their body. They hate their quote unquote behavior. And I'm really in the business of trying to help women befriend their changes and their body through menopause and beyond, and before menopause. But really, the changes that occur are so challenging to their sense of self-value. This awfully not euphemistically, but patronizingly termed estrogen belts that people talk about, where the middle of your body tends to change shape. Some of our adipose tissue moves in perimenopause from our thighs and buttocks around to our middle. And unless you are at an extreme end of the spectrum of body size, i.e., way too small or way too large, where your health is affected, you can't move so well, your energy is bad, your digestion is bad, there is a huge spectrum of body sizes that are perfectly healthy. And if we take blood tests from a woman who is in a larger body, they could be just as healthy. The blood markers could be just as healthy as someone in a small body. And someone in a larger body who has unhealthy blood markers, no amount of liposuction is going to change that woman's blood markers. So the actual adipose tissue is not the problem. The lifestyle, the way that the woman is treating her body, and also the way she is able to treat her body given her circumstances. She may not have the money to buy whole foods. She may not have the self-esteem to go to the doctor on time. This is one of the issues with the health at every size movement, is that women are pushed from going to the doctor on time because they know the doctor will just say, lose the weight and come back to me, darling, which is just appalling. So in the perimenopause transition, our body shape changes and women fall apart. And that is unfortunately the number one concern reported from women. Is the number one thing that they dislike about their perimenopause is their change in body shape. And if you were to say to a child, it's not right for you to not have breasts and a bum, 10-year-old girl, you'd be vilified. If you were to say to a baby, you're not supposed to have plump buttocks and a squidgy tummy, you would be vilified. But if you say to a midlife woman, you're not supposed to have this shape where your waist is not as inny-outy and you don't have your breasts maybe are changing shape and size, you're not vilified. As a health and wellness professional, you are allowed to say to a perimenopausal woman, do not let your body change. And it is absolutely appalling and despicable. And you can hear my passion for the way in which we have made it okay for women to hate themselves in midlife. And we would not say to an 80-year-old whose wrinkles were curling up as she laughed, you're letting yourself go. We would love her wrinkles. There is something about the midlife woman who is not allowed to be anything other than what the world has told her she should be 10 years previously, 20 years previously. We need to learn to embrace the changes, because otherwise we're fighting ourselves till the day we die.
Oh my gosh. I love the growl.
I get mad.
This.
I really do get very mad.
It is ridiculous. But definitely if this is new to you, look into health at every size, ask lots of questions, because the medical system isn't up to date on the research that we really have with this.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And so if you have those messages swirling around in your brain and you're saying them to your students, really, really check in, and we can definitely challenge the way we're talking to. I love this analogy that you just gave of, we don't shame babies for, having their pudgy legs and their little rolls, or a senior with wrinkles, like an 80-year-old person with wrinkles, and we love it. And thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's why, language is a big part of my teacher training. And what language are you using? And I ask my teachers to use words like adipose tissue and superficial fascia rather than fat, or to talk about fat as something, talk about it positively. So fat is really sensual. It's very warming. It takes up, it's 70% of our brain is made of fat. It enwraps our our kidneys to keep them safe and warm. And it's really sensual. It is a beautiful thing to touch, and it feels lovely when it is touched. It feels lovely to have your fatty tissue touched. And one of the people who I think really helped me understand the beauty of adipose tissue is Gil Headley, and watching his dissections. And the way that he speaks about adipose tissue is utterly beautiful, and he transformed the way that I thought about it. And for my yoga teachers, I ask them when they're doing muscular work or say core work or Mula Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, that they're not talking about let's trim that waist, let's shed some pounds, that they're talking about strength and stability and metabolism and stuff that matters. I was going to swear there, but I didn't.
This is fantastic. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for sharing this with yoga teachers so that they can share it. It really makes a huge impact, and I'm just really grateful that we could talk with you today and learn from you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I love your work, and it's an honor to be talking to you and to all these teachers. And they're really welcome to reach out to me, just for a little email chat if they like. I'm very free and easy with my work and my offerings. And I would say, just as a gift to your teachers, just to think about the priorities for a woman in perimenopause. And those are really nervous system priorities, because you've got to support their sleep, their anxiety, and support their metabolism and their bones, their heart, and their brain.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much for all of this, Niamh, and also for agreeing to come and talk even more inside of Pelvic Health Professionals. Again, connected yoga teachers, you are more than welcome to bring your questions to that call. You can head over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com to join that call live. And if you're listening to this episode beyond December of 2022, not to worry, the recording will be in there for you. And I'm just excited that we get to go beyond this conversation today and continue the learning, continue the conversation. If you want to continue this conversation, some great places to do that is you can comment on our website. That's over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/299 for today's episode. You can also share your thoughts in our Facebook group, the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group, and you can find that from our website homepage, or you can leave us a voicemail from our website as well. One of the key takeaways in this conversation today with Niamh for me was where Niamh was talking about how not all medical professionals can just recommend yoga because there aren't direct studies like here is how yoga will help with someone who is in the perimenopause or postmenopausal phase. Yet there are so many studies that are connected to the symptoms that people will experience, let's say like yoga for sleep or yoga for anxiety, or how yoga can help with hot flashes and kind of regulating that system of the body. So that was really fascinating to me. And I hope that we get to this place where yoga is more and more recognized in terms of the benefits it can offer to someone in this phase when it's the yoga that's really helpful. If you have personal experience or stories how yoga has helped you through the phases that surround menopause, I would love to hear from you. Let me know if you want to chat about it here on the podcast, if you want to send a voice message or an email. I would love to hear from you. Also, send me your information. What is your name? If you want to send a website, if it's okay to post it on the podcast, always let me know that. I like to give a shout out and link to people when I share stories. Also share your pronouns, where you're from, anything that you feel is relevant for us to know. Also, I have an ask. Next week on the podcast is episode 300. I'm answering some questions from listeners, and I am just so grateful for these questions. It was just heartwarming to listen to the congratulations message and then the really good questions from people who know me pretty well. And I'm always up for questions. If you have more questions, send them along. And also, if you want to celebrate with me and you want to say thank you to the podcast, and maybe you haven't done this already, leave us a review. Head on over to iTunes, click through, leave a review, and tell us what you like about the podcast. Tell us what we could do to improve with the podcast. Tell us your ideas. Anything you want to share in there, leaving a review is really the best gift that you can offer us as a podcast team. Speaking of team, I want to give a huge shout out to our team over here. Suzanne, who works away at making the audio sound really good. Crunch, who makes sure that you have access to the notes, the links, the timestamps. And Sinead, who reaches out to our guests and our listeners and helps put together all kinds of things on our social media and our graphics, and just really keeps me on track over here as well. Thank you so much to all of you. You make the podcast possible. If you are wanting to hang out in real time, the next place that I will be is online on Zoom, talking about yoga for menopause with Niamh, with our pelvic health professionals. That is happening December the 12th, 2022. That's our last guest expert call of the year for pelvic health professionals. But the great thing is if you decide to join and sign up, you can pay monthly or annually, but you will have access not only to that call, but everything else in the library, every guest expert call that we've done since the very beginning. And all of these hours also count towards continuing education credits. So if you have a pelvis or you work with people who have a pelvis, check it out, pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And also a huge thank you for being here all the way to the end of today's episode. And maybe some of you are like, I'm all the way here to episode 299 with you, Shannon, and waiting to listen to episode 300. I can't imagine that someone's listened to all the podcast episodes, but if you have, tell me. I want to hear from you for sure if you've listened to everything we've put out. And I'd also love to know, what are your questions? How can we help you? How can we support you? And of course, my final question for today is, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up? I'm going to get you to say your name the way you pronounce it, and then I'll try and make sure I get it right.
Yeah, so you can do the Canadian version, which is Niamh Daly. But if you want to try it, it's a diphthong, Niamh Daly. But the Niamh will be fine.
Niamh Daly.
Well done. You've got Irish blood, haven't you?
I do. Yeah, but it's not like around me all the time.
It doesn't trip off the tongue.
Niamh Daly.
Well done. You'll just spend your whole time thinking about it now and it'll come out all wrong.
Well, I'm so confused. Why the M and the H? Why is it spelled like that?
Yeah, we don't have a V in the alphabet. There's only 22 letters in the Irish alphabet or something. We don't have a U, a V, or a W, or an X, or a Y, or a Z. So we have to make them up. It's like Siobhan, your admin person, BH.
Sinead.
That's a very good point. You were suddenly thinking, oh my God, have I been saying Sinead's name wrong all this time? Oh my God. Okay, well, you probably heard of Siobhan as another name.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's BH.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's like there's a V there where the M and the H are.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is fascinating to me. Things I learn.
I know.